I was 66 years old when the defining moment of my professional life arrived. My name is Julian Gallagher, and I had spent the last 3 years of my life structuring a $4 billion merger between our financial analytics firm and Orion Investments. It was the crowning achievement of a 4-decade career. I had sacrificed evenings, weekends, and holidays. I had missed family gatherings and postponed vacations. But today was the day it would all pay off. The contracts were finalized, the press releases were scheduled, and Roland Vance, the lead investor from Orion, was waiting in the lobby. I stepped into the elevator, my mind racing with the final details of the agreement. As the doors opened to the lobby, I saw Roland standing with his team of advisors. He was a shrewd man, built like a linebacker, but with the mind of a chess grandmaster. We had spent hundreds of hours at the negotiating table, earning each other's respect. I walked toward him, a confident smile on my face, ready to seal the deal. But before I could reach him, a sharp voice cut through the murmur of the lobby. "Julian, stop right there!" I turned to see Declan Gallagher, the newly appointed vice president of operations. Declan was 24 years old, fresh out of business school, and possessed an arrogance that could only be funded by a trust fund. He was the CEO's son and my nephew, though we shared nothing but a last name. The CEO, Elias Gallagher, had handed Declan this executive role as a graduation present, despite his complete lack of experience. Declan marched up to me, clutching a freshly printed employee handbook. He looked me up and down with undisguised contempt. "Did you even read the new dress code?" he sneered, his voice loud enough to draw stares from everyone in the lobby, including Roland's team. "Excuse me, Declan," I asked, keeping my tone measured. "We have a major signing in 5 minutes. This is not the time." "It's exactly the time," Declan snapped, waving the handbook in my face. Section 4, Paragraph 2. All executive staff must wear company-approved conservative neckwear. That tie you are wearing is a vibrant burgundy. It violates the policy I implemented this morning. I stared at him, genuinely wondering if this was a bizarre prank. "Declan, I am wearing the same tie I have worn to every major closing for the past 10 years. It's a standard silk tie. Now, if you'll excuse me, our $4 billion partner is waiting." Declan stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "You aren't going anywhere. You think because you're old and you've been here forever that the rules don't apply to you? I'm modernizing this dinosaur of a company. And it starts by making an example of people who refuse to fall in line." He puffed out his chest, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "You're fired, Julian. Effective immediately. Hand over your key card." The lobby went dead silent. I could feel the eyes of dozens of employees burning into my back. I looked at Elias, the CEO, and my own brother, who was standing a few yards away. Elias looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, but he said absolutely nothing. He was terrified of upsetting his precious son. He simply looked away. A cold calm washed over me. 40 years of loyalty. 3 years of grueling negotiations to save this company from bankruptcy. And it ended over a burgundy tie, decreed by a 24-year-old with an inflated ego, while the CEO watched in silence. "Very well," I said. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my keycard, and dropped it into Declan's outstretched hand. "I accept your decision. It has been a pleasure." I turned on my heel and walked straight toward the exit. Roland Vance, who had been watching the entire exchange with growing disbelief, stepped into my path. He wrapped me in a firm hug, clapping me on the back. "Julian, my friend," he boomed, deliberately ignoring Declan, "ready to sign the merger and make some history?" I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "I'm afraid not, Roland. As you just heard, I was fired a moment ago. The deal is off my desk." Roland slowly pulled back. He turned his head to look at Declan, his eyes turning as icy as a winter storm. "You did what?" Declan, completely oblivious to the danger, puffed out his chest again. "I'm enforcing company policy, Mr. Vance. We have standards here. Julian's attire was non-compliant. We can proceed with the signing in the boardroom. My father and I will handle the final details." Roland let out a short, incredulous laugh. He looked at Elias. "Elias, tell me this boy is joking. Tell me you didn't just fire the only competent executive in your entire building over a piece of silk." Elias stammered, stepping forward, his face flushed. "Roland, please, it's an internal matter. A minor misunderstanding. We can still sign. The contracts are ready. Julian was the architect of this entire merger." Roland interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He structured the debt. He mitigated the liabilities. He is the only reason Orion even considered acquiring this sinking ship of yours. Roland turned to his legal team. Pack it up! We're leaving! Wait! You can't just walk away! Elias panicked, rushing forward. The press release goes out in 20 minutes. The market is expecting this. Actually, Elias, we can, Roland said smoothly. Page 84, Section 9 of the preliminary agreement. The key person clause. It specifically states that if Julian Gallagher is no longer employed by the company in his current capacity prior to closing, Orion Investments reserves the absolute right to withdraw from the merger without penalty. Elias froze, his face drained of all color. What? No, that can't be. Julian wrote that clause. One of Orion's lawyers chimed in, adjusting his glasses. He insisted on it to protect the integrity of the deal. It seems he was protecting it from you. Roland extended his hand to me. Julian, when the dust settles, call me. I have a corner office waiting for you. He shook my hand firmly, then led his entire team out of the glass doors. I stood there for a moment, savoring the profound silence that had descended on the lobby. Declan looked at the keycard in his hand, then at the empty space where the investors had just been. He looked at his father. Don't worry, Dad, Declan said, his voice suddenly lacking its earlier bravado. They're just playing hardball. They'll be back. I didn't stay to hear Elias's response. I walked out into the crisp morning air, feeling a strange, intoxicating sense of freedom. My phone began buzzing relentlessly before I even reached my car. I turned it off, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and drove home. That evening, I poured myself a glass of aged scotch and turned on the financial news. The collapse of the Orion merger had hit the market like a meteor. Our company's stock, which had been artificially inflated by the rumors of the deal, plummeted by 40% in a matter of hours. Billions of dollars in market capitalization evaporated. Panic selling triggered automatic circuit breakers. It was a bloodbath. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation grew desperate. Clients began pulling their accounts. Creditors called in their loans. The board of directors convened emergency sessions. I spent my time reading, gardening, and enjoying the first real vacation I'd had in a decade. I ignored every frantic voicemail from Elias. I knew they would eventually have to come to me, and when they did, I would be ready. I didn't just want my job back. I didn't want an apology. I wanted to dismantle the nepotistic, corrupt structure that had allowed an arrogant child to humiliate me and jeopardize thousands of livelihoods. I spent my evenings consulting with top corporate litigators, structuring a plan that would trap Elias and Declan in a web of their own making. I uncovered irregularities in Declan's recent executive actions. Specifically, he had been terminating older, highly compensated employees to artificially boost his departmental margins. It was a textbook violation of the Warren Act, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, which requires 60 days' notice for mass layoffs. But Declan had done something even worse. In his haste to push me out and secure his power, Declan had forged my signature on a severance waiver, attempting to block me from claiming any equity payouts. It was a felony. California Penal Code, Section 470, forgery. This wasn't just a corporate mistake, it was a criminal act. And because the waiver was forged, it was void ab initio, legally invalid from the moment it was created. Furthermore, because I was over the age of 65, Declan's attempt to illegally deprive me of my financial assets constituted elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions. Code Section 15610-30. He had handed me the very weapon I would use to destroy him. Finally, on the 15th day, Elias showed up at my front door. He looked like he had aged 10 years. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was trembling. Julian, he pleaded, standing on my porch. Please, you have to help us. The board is threatening to oust me. We're facing bankruptcy by the end of the quarter. Orion won't even return our calls. I looked at my brother, feeling a twinge of pity, quickly overshadowed by resolve. You stood there and watched a 24-year-old fire me over a tie, Elias. You chose your spoiled son over the survival of the company. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. Declan was overzealous. He's been suspended. Please, Julian, we need you back. Name your price. I leaned against the doorframe. I'll meet with the board tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And Elias? Tell Declan he needs to be there. This concerns him, too. The next morning, I arrived at the corporate headquarters wearing the exact same burgundy tie. The boardroom was thick with tension. The entire board of directors was seated, looking exhausted and desperate. Elias sat at the head of the table, his face pale. Declan sat beside him, looking sulky and defiant, clearly believing this was all just a temporary setback. Julian, the chairman of the board, an imposing man named Richard, said, clearing his throat, "We appreciate you coming. The situation is dire. We are prepared to offer you full reinstatement, a substantial bonus, and a public apology from Elias and Declan." I remained standing. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick legal folder. I tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud. "I'm not here for a bonus, Richard. I'm here to present my terms for saving this company, and they are non-negotiable." The board members leaned forward. Declan scoffed. "You don't hold the cards here, old man. We're throwing you a lifeline." I ignored him and looked directly at Richard. "First, Elias resigns as CEO immediately. He will step down and surrender his voting rights on the board." Elias gasped. "Julian, you can't be serious." "Second," I continued, my voice unwavering, "Declan is terminated, not suspended. Terminated for cause with zero severance, and he forfeits all unvested equity." Declan slammed his hands on the table, standing up. "You can't do that. I'm the VP. I own shares." "You own nothing, Declan," I said coldly. I opened the folder and slid a document toward the center of the table. "This is a forensic analysis of the severance waiver you filed with HR 2 days after you fired me. The one that supposedly waived my right to my accumulated equity, which is valued at roughly $18 million. The room went dead silent. The board members stared at the document. "The signature on that waiver is a forgery," I stated. "You panicked when the stock crashed, realized how much my payout would cost your department's bottom line, and you forged my signature. That is a direct violation of California Penal Code, Section 470. It is a felony. Because the document was forged, it is void ab initio, meaning it never had any legal standing." Declan's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "But it gets worse," I continued, pulling out another document. "Because I am 66 years old. Your attempt to illegally strip me of my financial assets qualifies as elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code Section 15610.30. That carries severe civil and criminal penalties, including treble damages and mandatory attorney's fees." The board members were now looking at Declan with a mixture of horror and fury. "And finally," I said, looking at Richard, "Declan's little cost-cutting measure last week, where he fired 60 senior employees without notice. That's a massive violation of the Warden Act. You are looking at class action lawsuits that will bankrupt this company faster than the failed merger." I leaned over the table, planting my hands firmly. "You have a breach of fiduciary duty of epic proportions on your hands. If I walk out of this room, I go straight to the SEC, the Department of Labor, and the district attorney. Elias goes down for gross negligence, and Declan goes to federal prison." The silence in the room was absolute. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Elias had his face buried in his hands. Declan was shaking, staring at the forensic report as if it were a venomous snake. "What do you want, Julian?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I want the CEO position," I said. "I want controlling interest of the board. And I want Elias and Declan escorted out of this building by security within the next 10 minutes. If you agree, I will use my personal relationship with Roland Vance to bring Orion back to the table. I will fix the Warden Act violations by reinstating those employees. I will save this company. But I will do it my way." The board didn't even need to vote. The choice was between handing me the reins or facing total annihilation and prison time for the Gallagher family. Richard nodded slowly, agreed. Declan finally found his voice. "Dad, do something. You can't let him do this." Elias looked up, his eyes hollow. He looked at his son, then at me. "It's over, Declan. We lost." 10 minutes later, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the CEO's office, watching as security escorted Elias and Declan out of the building. Declan was carrying a small cardboard box, his shoulders slumped, his arrogance completely shattered. He looked up at the window, and for a brief second, our eyes met. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply turned away and picked up the phone to call Roland. The next few months were a masterclass in corporate restructuring. I was officially named CEO, and my first act was to publicly reinstate every single employee Declan had illegally terminated. I held a company-wide town hall, transparently addressing the crisis, the illegal actions of the previous administration, and my commitment to rebuilding a culture of merit and integrity. The response was overwhelming. Morale, which had hit rock bottom, skyrocketed overnight. The employees realized that for the first time in a decade, they had a leader who actually understood the business and valued their contributions. Bringing Orion back to the table was difficult, but not impossible. Roland Vance was furious about the initial debacle, but he was a pragmatist. He knew the underlying assets of our company were still incredibly valuable. I flew to New York, met with his team, and laid out a brutal, realistic path forward. I didn't hide our vulnerabilities. I exposed them and showed him exactly how I was mitigating the risks. Because he trusted me, and because the key person clause was now fulfilled with me at the helm, he agreed to a revised merger. The terms were slightly less favorable for us, a necessary penalty for Elias's incompetence, but it injected the capital we desperately needed to survive. Meanwhile, the legal consequences for Elias and Declan were quietly unfolding. While I had leveraged their crimes to seize control, I hadn't granted them immunity. The board, terrified of personal liability for breach of fiduciary duty, had launched an independent internal investigation. The findings were immediately turned over to the authorities. Declan's forgery and elder financial abuse charges were airtight. He attempted to fight them, hiring expensive defense attorneys using Elias's dwindling funds, but the forensic evidence was insurmountable. In the end, Declan was forced to accept a plea deal. He avoided federal prison, but he was convicted of a felony, placed on 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay massive restitution. His career in finance was permanently destroyed. No reputable firm would ever hire a convicted forger. Elias, facing intense scrutiny from the SEC for his failure to oversee his son's disastrous policies, was permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company. They had lost everything: their wealth, their status, and their legacy. But I wasn't finished. I recognized that the toxic culture Elias had fostered ran deep. The obsessive focus on superficial metrics, the nepotism, the disregard for the actual workers. It all had to be systematically rooted out. I instituted sweeping reforms. I tied executive compensation to employee retention and satisfaction, not just short-term profit margins. I created an anonymous reporting system for workplace grievances, ensuring that no manager could ever operate with the impunity Declan had enjoyed. And then, I turned my attention to the very thing that had sparked this entire chain of events: the dress code. I didn't just abolish it. I turned it into a symbol of our transformation. I partnered with our marketing department to launch a new internal initiative. We called it the Fabric of Success. The premise was simple. Professionalism is defined by competence, integrity, and results, not by a specific color of silk or the length of a hemline. We encouraged employees to dress in a way that made them feel confident and capable. The stifling, monochromatic atmosphere of the office vanished, replaced by a vibrant, dynamic energy, but I wanted to push it further. The incident with the burgundy tie had resonated with me on a deeper level. It highlighted the absurdity of arbitrary corporate rules. I decided to launch a Skunkworks project, a small, highly confidential team tasked with developing a new product line entirely outside our core financial services. I funded it through my newly acquired equity, utilizing the same clause I had demanded in my contract. The company would own 40%, but I would retain 60% controlling interest. The project was an adaptive professional clothing line. We focused on high-quality materials and innovative engineering, designing garments that could subtly adjust to different environments. Jackets with modular lapels, skirts with adjustable invisible hems, and, of course, ties that featured reversible patterns, conservative on one side, bold on the other. We called the brand Merit. It was a risky venture, a complete departure from our established industry. The board was skeptical, but my track record and my controlling interest kept them compliant. We spent a year in development, securing patents for the adaptive fastening systems under 35 USC's Section 271, ensuring that no competitor could easily replicate our designs. We meticulously crafted the brand narrative, embedding the story of its origin into the marketing. We didn't name Elias or Declan, but the story of an executive fired over a burgundy tie on the day of a billion-dollar merger was universally relatable. It struck a chord with anyone who had ever suffered under an incompetent, petty manager. When we finally launched Merit, the response exceeded our wildest expectations. The initial inventory sold out in 48 hours. The business press seized on the narrative, transforming it from a corporate scandal into a story of innovation and resilience. The brand became a badge of honor for professionals who valued substance over superficiality. The revenue from Merit quickly became a significant factor in our company's overall valuation. The 40% stake I had granted the firm generated millions in pure profit, silencing any remaining critics on the board. We had transformed a humiliating, destructive event into a massive commercial success. As Merit grew into an independent powerhouse, I realized that true revenge wasn't just about destroying those who wronged you. It was about building something enduring and meaningful in the space they had tried to tear down. I established a foundation funded by the profits from Merit. The foundation's mission was to provide legal support and career counseling for older workers facing age discrimination and wrongful termination. We specifically focused on cases involving elder financial abuse and Warren Act violations. I wanted to ensure that people who didn't have my resources or my leverage had a fighting chance against the Declans of the world. The foundation became my true legacy. We helped hundreds of professionals reclaim their dignity and their livelihoods. We successfully sued several major corporations, forcing systemic changes in how they treated their senior staff. Every victory felt like a vindication, a ripple effect stemming from that moment in the lobby. 3 years after the day I was fired, I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline. The company was thriving. The Orion merger had generated unprecedented growth, and Merit was preparing for an international expansion. My assistant buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Gallagher, there's a young man here asking to speak with you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. His name is Declan." I paused, setting down my pen. "Send him in." The doors opened and Declan walked in. The transformation was startling. The arrogant, puffed-up executive was gone. He looked older, tired, and deeply humbled. He wore a simple off-the-rack suit. He stood awkwardly near the door, refusing to meet my eyes. "Julian," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Declan?" He took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize, face to face. I've spent the last 3 years paying off restitution, working minimum wage jobs because no one will hire a felon in finance. I lost everything, my dad lost everything, and I realize now that it was entirely my fault. I was arrogant, I was stupid, and I tried to steal from you." I studied him. I had spent years harboring a cold, calculated anger toward him, but looking at him now, I felt nothing but a profound sense of indifference. He was no longer a threat, he was just a consequence. "Apology accepted," I said simply. He looked up surprised by the lack of vitriol. I also wanted to ask, the foundation you started. I saw that they have a rehabilitation program for white-collar offenders, a program to help them rebuild their lives and find legitimate employment outside of finance." I leaned back in my chair. "We do. It requires a rigorous psychological evaluation, a commitment to community service, and a demonstrated understanding of the harm caused. It is not an easy path." "I want to apply," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I know I don't deserve any favors from you, but I want to change. I want to build something real." I looked at the burgundy tie resting against my shirt. I thought about the journey of the last 3 years, the destruction, the rebuilding, the creation of Merit, the foundation. "The application is online, Declan," I said. "The review board is completely independent. I have no input on their decisions. If you meet the criteria, you will be evaluated fairly. Nothing more, nothing less." He nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the concession. "Thank you, Julian, that's all I ask." He turned and walked out of the office. I watched the doors close behind him. I didn't know if he would succeed in the program. I didn't particularly care. My focus was on the future. I picked up my pen and returned to my work, feeling the satisfying weight of a legacy built not on spite, but on resilience, integrity, and the unyielding power of true merit. The growth of the Merit brand required an extraordinary amount of logistical planning. We had to source ethical manufacturing facilities, develop new supply chains, and build a marketing apparatus from scratch. I personally interviewed dozens of textile engineers to perfect the adaptive hemline technology. We filed multiple patents, navigating the complex web of intellectual property law. We utilized 35U, SC Section 271 to vigorously defend our designs against cheap knockoffs that inevitably began to flood the market. It was a grueling process, requiring 16-hour days and relentless focus. But every time I saw a professional wearing our brand, moving with confidence and comfort, I knew the effort was justified. Simultaneously, the foundation was expanding its reach. We took on a landmark case involving a Fortune 500 company that had systematically terminated employees over the age of 60 just before their pensions fully vested. We utilized the same legal frameworks I had wielded against Declan, the Warren Act, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, and various state-level statutes concerning breach of fiduciary duty. Our legal team, funded by Merit's profits, won a historic settlement that not only compensated the victims but forced the company to implement strict oversight mechanisms. I found myself testifying before congressional committees, advocating for stronger protections for older workers. I spoke about the insidious nature of corporate nepotism and the devastating impact it can have on dedicated professionals. The story of the burgundy tie became a touchstone in these discussions, a vivid example of how unchecked power and superficial judgments can destroy value. Through it all, the core operations of the financial analytics firm continued to excel. The Orion merger, once a source of intense stress, proved to be highly synergistic. Roland Vance and I developed a strong working relationship based on mutual respect and shared strategic vision. We expanded our market share, acquired several smaller competitors, and consistently delivered strong returns for our shareholders. The board of directors, once a rubber-stamp committee for Elias, transformed into an active, engaged body that rigorously evaluated our performance. The contrast between the company under Elias's leadership and its current state was stark. We had replaced fear and compliance with innovation and accountability. We had proven that ethical leadership is not just a moral imperative, but a powerful driver of long-term commercial success. As I approached my 70th birthday, I began thinking about succession planning. I had no intention of clinging to power the way Elias had. I wanted to ensure a smooth transition, identifying and mentoring leaders who embodied the values we had fought so hard to establish. I looked for individuals who demonstrated resilience, strategic thinking, and a deep commitment to our employees. I wanted leaders who understood that a company's greatest asset is not its intellectual property or its market capitalization, but the people who dedicate their lives to its success. Looking back on that fateful day in the lobby, I realized that Declan's attempt to destroy me had actually been a catalyst for my greatest achievements. He had forced me out of my comfort zone, compelling me to confront the toxic environment I had tolerated for too long. He had given me the opportunity to rebuild the company according to my own vision, to launch a successful new brand, and to create a foundation that would continue to fight for justice long after I was gone. The revenge was complete. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was the quiet, undeniable reality of immense success built on the ashes of their failure. I had taken their worst blow, absorbed it, and used the momentum to build an empire they could never touch. The intricacies of the patent law under 35 U.S.C. Section 271 provided a robust shield for our innovations. We spent countless hours with our legal team, ensuring that every contour of our adaptive fastening mechanisms was meticulously documented and protected. This intellectual property became the bedrock of Merit's valuation. When competitors attempted to reverse engineer our designs, we didn't just send cease and desist letters. We pursued aggressive litigation to demonstrate our resolve. We made it clear that Merit was not just a clothing brand, but a technology company disguised as apparel. Our supply chain optimization was equally rigorous. We audited every factory, ensuring fair labor practices and sustainable material sourcing. We believed that a brand founded on principles of fairness and integrity had to embody those values at every level of its operation. This commitment to ethical manufacturing resonated deeply with our target demographic. Our customers were not just buying clothes, they were investing in a philosophy. They were making a statement against the arbitrary, often exploitative practices of traditional corporate culture. The Foundation's work provided a constant source of inspiration. Every case we won, every settlement we secured, reinforced the importance of our mission. We established a scholarship program for law students committed to labor rights and corporate accountability. We funded research into the psychological impacts of wrongful termination, providing valuable data to lawmakers and advocacy groups. We were building an ecosystem of support, ensuring that the lessons learned from my experience with Declan and Elias would continue to drive positive change. The financial analytics firm, meanwhile, continued its steady upward trajectory. The Orion merger had unlocked new markets and capabilities, allowing us to offer unprecedented value to our clients. We invested heavily in artificial intelligence and machine learning, developing predictive models that revolutionized how our clients managed risk. Our culture of meritocracy attracted top talent from across the industry, creating a virtuous cycle of innovation and growth. As the years passed, the memory of that day in the lobby faded, replaced by the tangible impact of our work. The burgundy tie, once a symbol of humiliation, had become a relic of a bygone era. I still kept it in my office, framed in a simple glass case, a silent reminder of the fragility of power and the enduring strength of true merit. It served as a daily affirmation of the choices I had made, the battles I had fought, and the legacy I was building. The journey had been arduous, fraught with challenges and uncertainties. But standing at the helm of a thriving enterprise, supported by a dedicated team and a clear sense of purpose, I knew that every struggle had been worth it. The fire that had threatened to consume my career had instead forged something stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more valuable. I had faced the worst of corporate America and emerged not just victorious, but transformed.